Very warm welcome to Ghazala Wahab and Professor Mohammad Sajjad to this wonderful book discussion on Born a Muslim, Some Truth About Islam in India. We have very much welcomed you to this group discussion, which has been organized by the Center for Studies of Plural Society. I would like, before proceeding with the discussion, I would like to give a small introduction about Ghazala Wahab, the author of the book. Ghazala Wahab is an executive editor, Force, where she writes on homeland security, terrorism, Jammu and Kashmir, left-wing extremism and religious extremism, and a contributor, a column, First Person. She contributed a chapter on the changing profile of terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir in the book Operation Prakaram, The War Unfinished. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you
are. She's a career journalist. She has worked with the Telegraph and an Asian Age. A very warm welcome to you, ma'am, to this wonderful book session. I was very much looking forward to this book session because I've read this book and this is like an amazing eye-opening. So I'm looking forward to this session very keenly and especially our audience. I would also like to introduce Professor Mohammad Sajjad, a very renowned person to chair this discussion. Professor Sajjad is a professor at the Center of Advanced Study in History, Aligarh Muslim University. Published books, Muslims in Bihar, Changing Contour, which has been published by Routledge in 2014, Contesting Colonialism and Separatism, Muslims of Muzaffarnagar since 1857. It was published in 2014 as well. So Professor Sajjad has published more than 24 research papers and around 25 review articles. He's a regular columnist for the Hindu, Economics Time, The Wire, Newsclick.in, Frontline, Hindustan Time, and Indian Express. A very warm welcome to you, sir.
First of all, my thanks to the Society Center for Studies of Plural Societies to have invited me to have this book discussion, a discussion on a book which is so very popular. And last year, one of my students told me about this book. Then I went through it and I found it very readable. This book has raised many pertinent questions. It has engaged itself with the issues confronting Muslim communities in India today. And going beyond mere diagnosis of the situation, it has attempted to propose some prescriptions too, particularly at the end of almost every chapter. So the diagnosis as well as the prescriptions are debatable among the cross sections of commentators and opinion makers. At the very outset, after congratulating the author for such a wonderful book, the first question that comes to my mind, particularly after several months have passed when the book hit the shelves, hit the stand, that English readership is very limited in India. And the kind of issues it has raised, I think it needs to be rendered into at least some of the major Indian languages so that it reaches the wider public. So I would request the author to first respond to this particular issue as to whether it ever occurred to her to get it rendered into some of the major Indian languages.
Thank you so much, Professor Sajjad. Thank you so much, CSPS, for this opportunity. And this is a most unusual way of beginning the discussion. Yes, the Urdu version is going to come out hopefully by the end of this month. It is being translated and published by a think tank based in Hyderabad. My publishers are English language publishers. They cannot put out a book in any other language in the market. They don't have the resources to do that. So perhaps this discussion will throw up some ideas where maybe it can be translated into Hindi or any other language with the backing of some publishing house.
Your book seems to put greater blame on the doors of the theologians, whereas it doesn't delve into why there exists some kind of disconnect between the non-retrogressive articulate segment and the rest of the Muslims. Let me make it more clear to you. The theologians sink and swim with the community in their woes, their crises, their everyday lives, etc. They persist in mobilizing funds for establishing madrasas and small-scale charitable activities. No such connect is there between the modern educated middle class and the Muslim masses, essentially speaking. This class is therefore not as much successful in establishing institutions either of modern education or of charitable organizations working on modern, transparent, trustworthy principles. If it is so, how do you look into this particular issue, particularly with reference to the problems that you have raised about the problems that the community or the Muslim communities are facing right now?
This is a very complex question. I'll try and answer this to the best of my abilities. There is a credibility issue when it comes to modern, educated, upwardly mobile Muslims. And I dare say, even I would have, and I also have faced this credibility issue where people of other religions may take me seriously if I'm talking about any issue pertaining to Muslims or Islam. But within my own community, within the Muslim community, I am challenged frequently, and rightly so, because I'm not a scholar, not Islamic scholar, but I'm also challenged when I'm commenting on everyday matters pertaining to Muslims living in India. The reason is that a lot of Muslims believe that only certain kind of leadership has the authority to talk about Muslim issues. And this has been their biggest problem. And I won't say that theologians have a disproportionate influence, but certainly a certain group of Muslims and conservative Muslims have traditionally assumed the leadership role of the community. And this has been there since many centuries. In fact, even when there were Muslim rulers who were not great practitioners of faith, but they did have a consultative role given to a ulama who would advise that particular ruler on how the policy making, the state policy making should be done, whether the ruler, the king or the emperor listened to that ulama or not, it's secondary. But this role, it was assumed that this is an important role to be given to a person who has some sort of a religious authority. And post-independence also, we've seen this sort of attitude in the cultivation of post-independence Muslim political leadership by the Congress Party. So I think the influence, the disconnect of, let's say, progressive, and I'm using the word very carefully because I don't like the word progressive Muslims, because we don't use the word progressive for any other community. I mean, we don't say progressive Hindu or progressive Christians. So I'm careful when I'm using this word progressive. But the problem is that people who are modern in their outlook, who are inclusive in their outlook, and who at the same time also are conscious of the fact that there is a deliberate marginalization of the Muslims, and they want to talk about it and they want to raise these issues, they are usually shouted out because the people within the community feel that they have no local standing. So I think that's to the detriment of the community itself.
Okay. You are admittedly from Western Uttar Pradesh, Agra. You were born and brought up there. Unlike what Muslim elites of this specific sub-region could do before independence, they haven't been able to establish qualitative Muslim minority educational institutions after independence. What could have been probable reasons, in your view, that the Muslim initiative for in these sectors could not be taken up after independence? We all know there are provisions in the Constitution, Article 29 and Article 30 of the Constitution, where minorities can have establish and manage their educational institution. So this is why I'm putting this.
I have not come across many Muslims in the area where I grew up who were financially solvent or politically very active. A lot of Muslims who were politically active they came from a certain caste or class group within the community, and they had no great interest in community service. I mean, that has been my experience while growing up. The other reason was that there was a sufficient number of missionary schools in this region. I mean, I also went to a missionary school. So the urge or the desire to create something of their own probably was not as strong in this group of people as in the other parts of the country. I think that has been another reason. And the third reason, to my given my experience of this community living in West, having grown up in this region, is that the level of education within the Muslims in this area is not very high. They do not give too much of importance to formal modern education. For them, literacy is enough, and religious education is enough. A lot of them come from business families. Either they come from farming families, or they have small businesses, or like in Agra, most of them have a shoe business, for which and it's hereditary. So they don't really require their children to study and study well, because they do not expect their children to seek employment outside the family business. So the focus on education has been very marginal here, which has been unfortunate. And I'm talking from my own background. My own family background has also been like that. The focus on education was always very limited.
I think I could not put my question very well because contrary to what you have observed, and there's no point one would disagree with you, but at the same time, Aligarh is not far away from Agra, and Aligarh Muslim University felt increasingly decade after decade, particularly after 80s and more particularly since the 1990s. Aligarh has been under big pressure because of Muslim demand for education, school education as well as higher education. And this is why I put this question, because Western UP has and had landed aristocracy and many other such affluent people. So they did not take initiative like that, nor even this Rampur Riyasat. They established library. They did not establish kind of residential schools or colleges or even medical colleges. Even a poor state like Bihar, a Muslim minority medical college was established in Bihar earlier than a Muslim of UP would take such initiative. So this is why I put this question. So what you say that there were missionary schools, or there are, which feed such demands, and therefore that could have been one of the reasons why didn't they establish institution. But when you look at the Aligarh campus, MU campus, what we see that no, there is huge pressure of Muslims, and Aligarh is not able to cater to that. And even then, we don't find good residential schools being established by such people. Therefore, I pose this question. Anyway, you have...
Actually, no, I'll just clarify that. My point about the missionary schools was only one point. The other point that I raised was that inclination or desire for education in this community in the Western UP, the landed gentry that you're talking about, most of them, as you said, were riyasats or people who had their own businesses. So their drive for education has been less. Even you would notice that a lot of people who now come to Aligarh, large number of students either come from Bihar or they come from Eastern UP or other parts of Central India. People from Western, the proportion of people coming from Western UP would be much less there. This is what I was told. I have not done any survey of the student profile of Aligarh, but my experience of living in Western UP has been that the drive for education amongst either the business families of Western UP or the landed gentry is much less than among those who come from backgrounds which had a history of education in the family, who are third or fourth generation educated people in their families. So that has been probably one of the reasons why they didn't think, or it didn't occur to them that they need to establish or they need to pool in resources to establish more educational institutions in this area. I am aware of a group of citizens who came together after this violence in near Muzaffarnagar area, and they are trying to establish some sort of a network of schools, not residential, but a network of modern English medium school with Islamic ethos. But I think they have run into some sort of fund crisis at the moment, but some efforts are being made. But on the whole, this drive was always lacking in this part of Uttar Pradesh.
So before we go into further deeper discussion about this whole issue, we would love to have a brief discussion about the book, what exactly the book is about, and how it will be beneficial for our audience and what we need to focus on, because most of our audience are from a different background, from a different in terms of discipline, and most of them have not read this book.
This book is basically about the state of Muslims in India today. I talk about their present status in India, and to come to the present status in India, I draw upon how Islam came into India and how this way of Islam coming into India determined their status in India. So, for instance, in the coastal belt of India, Kerala and coastal Karnataka, parts of Tamil Nadu, and even the coast of Gujarat, the primary source of Islam coming into this region was through trade. So the profile of the Muslims which grew in this area was it comprised largely of traders, people interested in doing business, and they were religious, all right. In the northern India, the influx of the Muslims followed invasions. So this also determined the profile of the Muslims who lived in North India, their equation with religion, their equation with their fellow other citizens of India, their equation with religion itself. So all of that determined the way, this was determined by the way Islam came to this part of the world. Similarly, the way Islam spread to Eastern India, again, it determined the profile of the Muslims there. Because of these multiple ways of Islam's entry into India, it has been received differently by the people who preceded Muslims in India. So the people who were living in India before the Muslims came, their equation with the Muslims also was determined in the manner they perceived Islam to be coming to India. This is the reason why the problem of communal violence has been more pronounced in certain parts of India as opposed to other parts of India. So this is one thing. Then I'm also talking about various sects within Islam in India, whether it's, beyond the Shia-Sunni divide, I'm talking about the sects which are within the Sunni faith, like, Sunni, it's the same faith, but within the Sunnis, you have Deobandis, you have Barelvis. So I have spoken about that. I have made the distinction how this has been a very peculiar to India phenomena, and this phenomena grew out of India. And one of the reasons why it grew out of India was because there was a very definitive Islamic thought indigenous to India. And that is why I refer to Islam that the Muslims in India practice to a very large extent as Indian Islam, because it has been a very geographically rooted Islam. It is not a monolith sort of a practice. A Muslim in Assam is very different from a Muslim in Kerala, and a Muslim in Gujarat is very different from a Muslim in Kashmir. So this geography has also been the reason how the community has grown or developed over the centuries. So this is another part of the book. I'm talking about the status of women in Islam. I make make a comment on how within religions, Islam has been the most feminist of all religions. The religion itself, the rights that Muslim women enjoy come from the religion. They do not come from the way it has been perceived by writers who have written on Islam subsequently. So Quran as a religious book has given such rights to women which no other religion provides. All the rights that women of other faith enjoy, they come from secular laws, not from religion. So that's that's another part of the book. And the biggest chapter of the book is on the marginalization, that concerted, deliberate marginalization that Muslims have faced in India even before partition. Partition was a watershed moment, but this process of marginalizing Muslims started well before that. I have attempted to kind of put my finger on the origin of this marginalization, the reasons for this deliberate vilification of Islam, what has been the origins of this. So I've tried to find that out, and I have linked that to a present situation in India, where Muslims are already second-class citizens, both in the law as well as in practice. So that is the sum total of the book.
Your book has dealt with the implications of petrodollars, quote unquote, and resultant Hindu envy against Muslims. But this book has shied away from the issue like public assertion of ritualistic religiosities and their implications on Hindu-Muslim relations in recent decades. Conversely put, not confining religion into private space has been turning out to be a big menace. And this issue has been dealt with by some of the historians, particularly Sandria Freta in context of UP, colonial UP, late 19th century and early 20th century. So would you like to enlighten the viewers on this? Do you think a section of technically skilled artisan and professional communities of Muslims have attained certain degree of affluence after liberalization? That is, the poor and low castes becoming affluent have caused Hindu envy, feeding the Hindutva project, because Hindustan या South Asian society में ये होता है कि गरीब अमीर हो जाए तो ज़्यादा तकलीफ होती है, हसद ज़्यादा बढ़ जाती है. तो and it is this feeling of jealousy on which Hindutva project has been fed partly. So we would like you to respond to it.
I agree with this completely. There is the jealousy factor, and this jealousy is not just about Muslims becoming richer than their Hindu neighbors in villages or in small mohallas.
Of the corresponding
the jealousy.
Yes.
The corresponding class, yes. I think the jealousy goes far back when Savarkar propounded the concept of Hindutva. I think that concept of Hindutva also stemmed from a sense of envy. And I have quoted that in the book, where he had huge admiration for the way Muslims were so committed and devout to their religion that come what may, they would say their prayers when it was time for prayer. And they were willing to lay down their life for religion. So that was something which he admired a lot, and he wanted Hindus to follow that. So, and he has written about that. Savarkar himself wrote about that. And I've quoted that. So I think the jealousy or envy has been the driving force. It is not one of the forces. I think that was the beginning of the Project Hindutva. The other thing which I think has fueled Hindutva and in recent times is the realization that more Muslims were demonstrative about their religion, which Hindus did not mind earlier, and they were very liberal and open about this. Even they would go to dargahs, and Hindus would also have some sort of faith in a few of the Muslim shrines. So when they realize are not reciprocating this, and the reason Muslims would not reciprocate is primarily because they did not feel the need to do so. They were not. They did not need to look for any benediction beyond their own faith. So this has also been a source of angst, that if we have faith in your religious symbols or your religious beliefs, then why don't you have faith in ours? This is a very complex thing. I mean, you can't force a person to say, no, why don't you also go to the temple? He or she doesn't feel the need to do so. So that has also been a big factor in this sort of revisionist Hinduism that we are, and I'm talking of Hinduism, not Hindutva, that we are witnessing in the last few decades. The public display of their religious moments is also a consequence of that. These various yatras, and these are all, I don't think it happened 30 or 40 years back. It's probably a few yatras. I mean, I'm sure some yatras happened earlier also, but the preponderance of yatras, every second festival now turns into a yatra. And every yatra is an opportunity for provocation. So I think that is all driven by this this envy. And I have spoken about this. It's an unpleasant thing to say, but to my mind, some unpleasant things also need to be said once in a while. So it's envy and some sort of inferiority complex, a religious inferiority complex, which propels a certain bunch of people to behave in this sort of competitive religiosity. So I think all of these have been contributory factors to the rapid growth of Hindutva. But we must not, and we must never forget that this project has been going on for over 85 years since the RSS was founded. It was our values of coexistence, what everybody now reviles as Ganga Jamuni and say it's nonsense. But obviously, Ganga Jamuni doesn't mean that you're eating out of each other's plates or you're marrying into each other's families. It meant this appreciation of existing together in the same space without encroaching or without interrupting another person's on a life or livelihood on the basis of religion. So I think that value system, that inheritance of coexistence was so deep-rooted that it took them almost 60 years before they could make inroads. And in the last 20 years, they have these poisonous seeds have started to bear fruit. So I think hats off to us as people that we resisted so long. And hopefully we'll find our roots once again and go back to what we used to be, sensible, reasonable, normal people.
as a journalist, you have been into security issues and global politics. And therefore, I think this is an important question that we should share with you for your reflections. In terms of global politics, Turkey, Saudi Arab, and Iran may be representing three different responses from the side of India's Muslims. While your book has touched such aspects, but little more of explanation would be enriching, particularly because you as a journalist have explored global security issues. So what kind of implications the foreign policies or domestic policies of these three countries exercise on Indian Muslims? Putting it differently, how do different segments of India's Muslims look upon these three countries?
I think Turkey has been a role model Muslim state for not just the Indian Muslims, but if one goes by former Pakistan Army Chief and President Pervez Musharraf's book, Turkey was a model state that even he wanted Pakistan to emulate. So Turkey has always been a state which Muslims in our part of the region, South Asia, thought was the kind of a Muslim country they should aspire for. I mean, not India. India is not a Muslim country, but the Indian Muslims aspired for this sort of a modern, westernized, but religiously rooted life. As far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, the very after the discovery of oil, the whole profile of Saudi Arabia changed. It was earlier only a place where Islam originated, and Muslims, the holiest of Muslim shrines were in Saudi Arabia, so that it had a very strong emotional connect. But after the discovery of oil, Saudi's profile changed, and as Indian Muslim diaspora in Saudi grew, the influence on our mindset, on our psyche, Indian Muslim psyche, also increased disproportionate to their actual influence even in their region. So that has been the Saudis' role and has not been a salutary or a positive role at all. Iran, I think, is a very interesting country for the simple reason it is one of the oldest civilizations, precedes Islam. It has a very, very rich heritage. And despite the revolution, despite the early post-revolution years and decades where there was a lot of focus on imposed religiosity on the people, it has found a balance between being reasonably progressive. It has found a balance between Western education, Western science, and Islamic ethos. And it still wields that sort of influence on literature, on poetry, on philosophy, on thinking, Islamic thinking. So I think Iran's influence has been very insidious, not always visible, but everything a North Indian Muslim does or speaks or behaves, a lot of it is drawn from Iran, whether we admit it or we don't, but that's the truth.
There are some well-meaning Hindus, may or may not having a tinge of majoritarian proclivities. They think majority of India's Muslims put greater primacy on their Islamicness rather than their Indianness. And this, they say, is at the root of the growing anti-Muslim hatred among Hindus. How do you look at this proposition? Is it really like that?
I disagree with that completely. And the reason for that is that even today, when they are facing so much of persecution, and there are a few countries in the world which are open to asylum giving to Muslims coming from India. If you see the ratio of people who have exited India in the last 8 years, the Muslims are a very small minority. The majority has been Hindus who support the government, who support the Hindutva project, but have sought a PR, permanent residency abroad, or have sought whatever, they have moved abroad. So then obviously, on the face value, I would say their connection with India has been more tenuous than a Muslim's connection, because despite all the problems a person is facing, despite the diminishing economic opportunities for a Muslim in India, they're still hoping that things will improve, and they're staying back. So I think this is not correct. The other thing I just add very briefly is that this idea of Indianness is also, it's a very fluid idea. What exactly is Indianness? I mean, how do you feel your Indianness? Do you feel your Indianness living in a place where you live, or do you feel your Indianness because you're living in the US and on Independence Day you take part in the parade?
There is an increasingly wider receptivity about the history of quote unquote Hindu hurt, particularly at the hands of the Muslims. And this is what is providing fertile grounds for anti-Muslim hatred. This is how even the causation of India's partition is sought to be seen by increasingly larger segments of Hindus who seek to put all blame only on Muslims, blame of partition. This has serious bearing on India's Muslims these days. How do you look at this issue?
See, I think Muslims have to be, and Muslim leaders have to be blamed for this, for owning up full responsibility for partition. This was the job of Muslim leaders, politicians, as well as Muslim intelligentsia at that point, to clarify and communicate this at every opportunity, that the responsibility of partition was not, or the blame of partition was not theirs alone to bear. If at all it was to be divided 50-50, then it was 50% Hindus, 50% Muslims. But I would not even say it was 50-50. I think the Muslims played along with the idea of partition. They were not the proponents of the idea of partition. And till the last moment, they did not imagine, even Jinnah did not imagine, that the partition would actually be sundering of two countries in the way it happened. So I do not think Muslims should be absolved of putting this mostly sword over the head of Muslim citizens. Even in the course of writing this book, when I met a few Muslim politicians, even today they are talking in terms of कि ये partition का cross हमारे कंधों के ऊपर है, and I was shocked that they still have internalized the idea that they were responsible for partition. So it is entirely their fault, and they should be held accountable for this. The other thing is that the Hindu hurt actually is an imaginary concept, and and even Hindus know this. Why I'm saying this is because when you ask them the reasons for their hurt, until the exodus of Kashmiri Pandits from Kashmir, they had nothing to say, nothing to account for Hindu hurt. Everything was in the realm of imagination, that thousands and thousands of temples were destroyed, and thousands of Hindus were killed, thousands of women were raped. No, without any evidence, without any notion of which part of history were they locating their hurt to. But once the insurgency started in Kashmir and the Pandits were driven out, there was violence against Pandits, nobody can deny that. That put a focus to their hurt. So now when a Hindu person, a Hindu bigot, when he talks or she talks about cruelty by Muslims, the first thing, and probably the only thing they can come up with, what about Kashmiri Pandits? Because beyond this, there is nothing. If they start talking about violence, I mean, if they talk about, okay, this Hindu man was killed in Karnataka, or this Hindu person was killed in Hyderabad, the other side can draw a list of 10 Muslims who've been killed in that same time period. So obviously this hurt is only in the realm of fantasy.
The concluding chapter of your book puts up a question: what India's Muslims want. You close it at reclaiming religion. Are you aware of the implications of such prescriptions? How much of latitude does such paradigm provide for a liberal, inclusive world?
This is a wishful, the chapter itself is a wishful, it ends on a wishful note. So I'm not saying it is rooted in our present realities, but ideally this is what I would want to happen, that each individual should be the speaker of his or her own faith, instead of being herded by a certain group of people who assume leadership on their behalf. And this is not for Muslims alone, but this is for everybody, including Hindus. Why should they be spoken of by a certain group of people? Why everybody should speak on his or her behalf? Because if it is left to individuals, we are capable of forging very good bilateral relationships between Hindus and Muslims. And we are very capable of coexisting if we are not provoked and if we are not herded by people who have vested interests in keeping us divided.
Thank you so much. It was a very in-depth discussion. And yeah, we have already passed time. So there are some questions on the chat box. Khalilullah Khan asked, what are your views about Muslim leadership? Does it exist? What it means to be a leader of Muslim community?
Actually, I think the Muslim leadership in India has been the most pathetic leadership ever. We've had no leaders of any consequence after independence, barring just a few which could be named, which could be counted on your fingertips. And even these leaders have been, their reach, their sway over the people has been very geographically limited. So if there has been a leader in, let's say, Uttar Pradesh, his or her sway has been limited to that particular district or the neighboring district of Uttar Pradesh. Or if there has been a leader in Hyderabad, then the reach has been limited to areas in and around Hyderabad. So I think there has been no Muslim leader of consequence who could talk of Muslim issues. There have been Muslim politicians and a lot of national level Muslim politicians, but they've not been the leaders of Muslims. And the reason I'm saying that is because when a Muslim politician talks, he rarely talks about the Muslim issues. He talks about Islamic issues in India. He talks about the dangers to Islam in India, or she talks about dangers to Prophet's reputation in India. So these are not the people, these are not the politicians who have raised any issue of Muslim welfare. You would seldom find a Muslim politician mobilizing Muslims for the sake of more educational institutions in Muslim dominated areas. You would seldom find a Muslim politician mobilizing or making a representation to the government on fake cases against Muslims. The percentage of prisoners in any Indian jail is, the ratio of the Muslims is highest in India, who are under trials in various prisons. Most of them are under trials in cases which have, even the charge sheets have not been filed. So you will not find a Muslim politician talk about these things. So these are the issues which are Muslim issues. And if a leader is not taking up these issues, then that leader is not a leader. That leader is a mere politician furthering his or her own interests. So that is my opinion of Muslim politicians or leaders.
We have one more question. Let's take it as the last question. Does your book provide a resolution to the increasing separatism in India? She has asked this question.
What is separatism in India?
Yes. Does your book provide a resolution to the increasing separatism in India?
No. What is separatism in India?
Communal.
Communal. Okay. See, the answer to the communal problem in India was given by the late poet Kafi Azmi many years ago. And he said that if every Muslim has 5 or 6 Hindu friends and every Hindu has 2 or 3 Muslim friends, there would be no communal issue in India. And by friends, he meant, and I also believe, real friends, not token friends. Because if you have friends, you would understand each other, you would understand where the other person is coming from, you would understand each other's fears, each other's concerns, and you'd be able to answer them. If I have a Hindu friend and my Hindu friend really thinks that I am her or his friend, if he has any misgivings about Islam, he would not or she would not hesitate to ask me, and I would not take it amiss. I would answer and explain to the best of my abilities. But if this person is not my friend, he or she would make assumptions about me, about my religion, about my practice of religion, and will live with this assumption. So I think the solution of our communal problem is that we talk to each other much more, we ask questions of each other much more, and if we have doubts about other person, instead of harboring that doubt, instead of just thinking within ourselves how terrible that other person or other person's religious beliefs are, just ask.
Thank you so much for this wonderful book discussion and a very in-depth discussions which we had with Professor Sajjad. And it was always a pleasure to have you in this platform so that our readers, our viewers, and especially our audience who are just the young interns will read this book and will know more about. And this discussion has led them to a more, more in-depth approach, not just reading the book, but reading between the lines what it talks about and how comprehensively one can deal with a specific issue. So thank you so much for this opportunity, and hello, for this opportunity and discussing very comprehensively about the issues, not just about the book but also the general aspects which is happening in the society.
Thank you so much, Azima, for this wonderful opportunity.
Really
I
sorry
hope I have
because of
not
my
ruffled
internet
any.
issues. I'm still in Jaipur.
That's okay. So I hope I have not ruffled any feathers. I have not hurt anybody's sentiments by being candid about a few issues. And wonderful discussion. I hope some of you would find the desire to buy the book and read it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, ma'am.